Hi everyone, my name is Eric Schurter and I'm the product manager for the editor group, which is part of the Create stage at GitLab, and I'm very excited to share with you an update on the remote development category. We have a group conversation coming up in the next couple days on November 2nd, 2022. I hope you can join me for that synchronous conversation, but if you can't, don't worry. I have some links at the end of this presentation for how you can follow along, and I'll be happy to answer any questions asynchronously. So what is remote development? For as long as it's been around, the web IDE has been held back a little bit in utility by the lack of a server runtime environment. So while it's great for small to moderately complex development tasks, if you need to run tests or compile your code in any way, what you would end up doing is kicking off a CI pipeline and waiting for the output and then coming back to the editing experience from the MR or from the job output. But more likely what you're doing is you're going to clone the repository locally, set up your local dev environment, and do all your work outside of GitLab. Remote development as a category, our goal is to take that collection of dependencies and components in your local development environment, move them to the cloud, and allow you to seamlessly connect from the web IDE or the editor of your choice to that environment and negate the need to manage your local environment at all. And the reason we're doing this is because frankly, developers are already headed in this direction. We've seen increased adoption of cloud-based IDEs, including our own web IDE, and we think that offering a more complete editing experience within GitLab will accelerate that transition. We also hear very loudly that developers are tired of spending time managing their local development environments. They want it to just be configured once and work forever. Customers from any sector you can imagine are reaching out and expressing interest in this, whether they're 10,000 developer enterprises or companies with 20 to 50 developers on their team. We think that it's been the adoption of these workflows has been accelerated a little bit by the global pandemic and the increasingly remote workforce, but generally speaking, the majority of our cloud-based workflows are going to involve a remote development environment and cloud-based IDE of some kind in the near future. And those customers and those developers that have already adopted these workflows are noticing that the availability of these remote development environments are offering benefits in a variety of areas. First of all, accelerating onboarding and improving the developer experience. They're able to get people committing to production in the first day, rather than taking weeks to configure a new computer or something like that. You have a much tighter feedback loop when you're working on a team that maybe has you switching from project to project or service to service, and you don't have to spend time reconfiguring your local environment to provide feedback on someone else's code or review somebody's changes. Or whether you're working on an open source project and you have maybe multiple projects across multiple languages and you don't need to spend time reconfiguring. It also lends to a more secure development platform where you don't have to clone your repository locally, and the provenance of the changes can be tracked a little more closely through the container or virtual machine in your remote development environment. As we build out our offering, we have a handful of guiding principles I want to highlight. First off, we want to be platform agnostic. So you should be able to publish and provision your remote environment on your existing cloud, whether that be AWS or Google Cloud or eventually our own GitLab managed platform similar to our shared runners. They should work equally as efficiently. We also want to be IDE agnostic. So we know that your editor of choice is a very personal thing and sometimes can be driven by things outside of your control, like the language that you have to write in for a project. While we would love you to use the web IDE, we also want you to be efficient working in desktop VS Code or JetBrains or Vim on your computer. So similarly, we feel like we should not be forcing everybody to do the work inside the actual development environment, running the IDE inside the container, and making all contributions come from there. You need to be able to connect securely to the environment from multiple vectors, whether it's desktop or web, in order to be flexible and integrate this into your team's workflow. And then lastly, the environments themselves should be defined in an easy to use format that's versioned and stored alongside your source code. And that makes it easier to maintain and to collaborate on optimizing those environments. So what have we been working on? Over the last 3-4 months, we've been working on evaluating the competitive landscape and technical architecture options we have at our disposal within GitLab and then in the open source community. We've been working on replacing the web IDE with an instance of VS Code running entirely in the browser, which facilitates the connection to a remote host that we have proven that we can connect to. And right now we're working on iterating on our technical direction for our more complete offering that allows you to manage the environments within GitLab. So actions speak louder than words. If you want to, you can try out the new web IDE. It's behind a feature flag. If you're on self-managed, you can turn it on. It is not feature complete, so it is not available on gitlab.com yet, but we are working on it. Once that is available to you, the ability to configure a connection from the web IDE to a remote host running VS Code Server is available to you, and it works great. You can get a live terminal in the web IDE. And so now that we've delivered that minimal experience in the web IDE, the only thing that doesn't give you is the ability to configure and orchestrate and really manage those environments within GitLab. So what's next? We've established that you can connect from the web IDE to a remote environment. So now we want to be able to define those environments, dependencies, and everything, store them in the repository and provision them within GitLab and provide insight in a dashboard so that you can manage those resources appropriately, all within GitLab. Generally speaking, this is not a very technical architecture diagram, but this is how all the things kind of connect together. And I want to run through a few components real quick. First of all, as I mentioned, the standalone web IDE that we're working on replacing the existing Monaco-based web IDE with a VS Code-based instance that runs entirely in the browser. You'll have access to extensions, including our own GitLab VS Code extension, GitLab Workflow. And from there, you will also have the ability to connect to a remote host. But if you don't want to manage that remote host manually, what you'll be able to do is define that environment in a dev file. Dev file is an open CNCF project, and it's supported by many of the key players in this space. You are given an extensible schema and inheritance model, so you can build very complex environments in a dev file. And then we will build a custom server that will communicate, that will take the dev file, communicate with the GitLab agent for Kubernetes to provision and orchestrate an environment based on that description. Once your cloud has been, once your container has been provisioned in the cloud, you'll have an instance of the GitLab agent in there and an IDE host. This architecture supports being able to define what IDE host we will have running in the container. At first, we'll limit it to VS Code, but eventually we'll be able to do things like offer JetBrains or Thea or maybe even alternative editors. And then we also realize that some customers, I've said containers a few times, some customers may prefer not to run containers themselves. So we're investigating options for Kata containers or using Firecracker to give sort of the isolation and scalability benefits of a VM within the Kubernetes cloud. Now, as I said, if you want to contribute, if you want to give some feedback, we have some links. Our direction page is available, and I'll put this video on the direction page, so you might have found this video from there. You can click our category Maturity Epic and see all of our issues and what we have planned. And then in Slack, if you're at GitLab here, we have a couple Slack channels that we do most of our work in. So please drop me a note if you have any questions. Thanks for your attention, and I hope you have a great day.